Alright everyone, thank you for coming. I call this meeting to order at 5:31. I'm going to continue down the list with roll call, starting with Alejandro. Here. Eric.
Here.
Joey.
Here.
Tanya.
Here.
Edgar.
Here.
Monica.
Here.
Dane.
Here.
Alex.
Here.
Aubrey.
Here.
Josh is excused. Martin.
Oh, right here.
Lacey.
Here.
Kirti.
Here.
Jessica.
Here.
Me. Here. And then Greg. Here. Awesome. Okay. We'll move to the approval of tonight's agenda. Please take a look at it. Eric.
I move to approve the agenda.
Tanya seconds. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? One abstention. So moved. Awesome. Going into the minutes from last week on the 30th. Please take a look. If any concerns. Eric?
I move to approve the minutes from the October 30th, 2019 meeting.
Alex seconds. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? One abstention. So moved. Awesome. Going into reports. I haven't gotten any reports or contact from anyone coming into this, but we'll be talking later. Going into advisors. Lacey.
The only report that I wanted to talk about is, you'll see our actual supplemental list, is not updated with all the requests that we got, for the deadline. So the deadline was today at 5. But I'm sitting on about 16 requests. So to get processed and through, I've got through about half of them, but this list is not updated. So I guess the question that I have for the committee, because I've gotten a couple of feedbacks from the individuals that are submitting the requests, is the intent to see all of, we'll say, a total of 25 requests for this quarter in this quarter?
How was it phrased when we announced this to them, I guess?
I can tell you. Because I just pulled this up a minute ago. I'm pulling up Alejandro's email that he sent out. I mean, in the part is I'll pull this up and then read it in a second. Said, good afternoon, you're seeing this email because, and this was the email that, again, Alejandro sent out to the presidents and advisors. You're receiving this because of that. This is just to inform you that if you plan to submit a supplemental funding request to the S&A Committee, the deadline to submit a supplemental funding request for fall quarter is Wednesday, November 6th at 5 p.m. Any requests submitted after Wednesday will not be reviewed until winter quarter. And then if you have questions, to contact me. And so while it doesn't necessarily say that they're all going to be seen, I think there are individuals, based on some of the feedback, who their interpretation was if they submit it, it's going to be seen. What we've done in the past is when we get them, we fit whatever we can fit on the calendar and then it moves to wherever it is. So I think some of the question is because there's going to be a lot of, and it's going to go to Circuit County, these questions and the ability to respond. Eric?
Well, I think we should try to see them, but also if there are things that are in winter quarter or spring quarter, having them on the first meeting when we return, those ones I would think would be out of the realm of normalcy.
So with that being said, normally Circuit County we process as they come in.
Yeah.
And we put them in the queue as they're submitted. Just briefly going through some of the dates, there is a good chunk that is either in, we'll say, March, or I'm sorry, there's a couple in February, March, April. But there are another handful that are happening either in November through early January, which is actually all before winter quarter starts. It's about a few days before that first day since we are starting a little later. So I guess where I'm sitting is, do we want to, instead of taking them as they come in, do we want to try to prioritize the ones that are happening before winter quarter or in that January time?
Did you have? Okay. I was wondering if we know when the next PBAC meetings are scheduled.
So they are scheduled about every 2 weeks. So there is going to be, there's there's the 12th of November, the 26th of November, probably the 11th of December, and then before Christmas. So there's about 4 PBAC meetings before January. So normally, what we've had, well, I should say, what we've had done in the past is that we try to wrap everything up before our last meeting in December. So if we were to do that, they would be voted on from PBAC before January.
It doesn't seem like we want to start trying to prioritize based on the date that something is happening, because then we're discouraging people thinking ahead and prioritizing people who maybe haven't, or maybe just because of, right, when dates are, sometimes they're closer, sometimes they're not. But some people, their event might be far out, but to secure what they need that information now, or to know if they can go. So there might be a reason why they're submitting so early, and to then put them to the back of the list because they did that and thought to do that doesn't feel quite right. So whether we guarantee to see them or not, I'm not kind of speaking to that, but this trying to kind of prioritize them in a way that's not the order in which they come, I feel like presents some additional problems.
And I think given that, I mean, it's all reimbursement, fitting in what we can makes sense. I mean, obviously that's what we do towards the end of the quarter anyway. I mean, I feel like that's a fine way of going about it.
Fair.
Yeah, I agree with Tony. I think we should take them in the order they've been requested, and then, yeah. Can we plausibly, with the other discussions we're having, get through all of them by the last meeting for this quarter?
So I can tell you based on planning, because this isn't setting the agenda, is again, as you all know, they have 10 minutes to present, 10 minutes for questions, and we schedule 10 minutes for deliberation. We have about 8 hours worth if we have all 16 of these, and we have 3 meetings left. Next week's including the 3 that we would be voting on, meaning we have about 5.5 hours of time. So we would not, either we would be sitting here beyond 8 o'clock, or we would need to schedule an extra meeting sometime before the end of the quarter for us to come in to do those if we were going to try and get them all. Otherwise, we would get through, now I can't remember when I did the math on this, what we said earlier, we'd get through probably a little over 10 of the 16 that are left.
And then we could do those, ostensibly those 6 when we return. And would of any of those 6, would it put it outside of their event time frame?
I mean, I'd like to go through them all just to be sure, but just briefly looking at them, there's probably going to be a few. There happens to be 2 like completely separate conferences that are happening that basically first week of January, which means that they might even not even be here for that first meeting that we have. So I can work through them, but I just really wanted to get your guys' take about at least, you know, the queue and how you guys want to do that, and I can report back. We are basically full next meeting as well, so these new requests wouldn't have even really made next meeting. So I can make sure to get them all processed and updated by then, and then we should be able to look at those dates. I would say there's at least a couple, well, I would say there's at least 3 that I know of that they might actually not be here when they're scheduled to present because of their conferences, but we can look at those dates and give you some actual numbers. And just for the reference, I haven't gone through and approved all of them yet, so even though they've been submitted, I'm taking those as submissions, and so there might be some back and forth once we finalize all of the submissions, and maybe they won't all be maybe like the 16th.
And then, okay, so that just kind of addressed the question, do we want to hear all 16, or are we fine just hearing maybe close to 10 this quarter, and we push the other 6 to another quarter?
I think we should really hear them, because speaking on what Tanya said about being upfront about getting your money early, I don't want to limit those, but I also don't want to limit the other ones. And I think it behooves us that maybe we need to have less time on the other subject. And then when we come for winter quarter, we can be more prepared for having the whole quarter to talk about, funding requests and talk about the changes that you all want to do. I think we need to prioritize the funding requests this quarter. That's just my 2 cents.
Go ahead. Okay, sorry. Something's got to give here, right? Like, people aren't going to stop requesting money. It's just going to keep going because people are aware, and we can't make something else the priority and have more of these going all at the same time unless we're asking people to devote, like this group, to stay here even longer. This is already a pretty substantial commitment. So I think that at some point we're gonna have to figure out like what are our options. I know that some other entities have moved to like a body that deals with kind of the bigger issues and one that hears funding requests separately. I don't know if it's obviously nothing we're gonna be able to like decide on here because that would be a big deal, but it seems like even if we said, okay, we're going to be more organized next quarter, in winter we're really going to tackle these big issues, okay, well then that means that we're not going to be hearing supplemental requests that are coming in. Or we're going to be staying here for longer than the 3 hours, a week? A lot of hours a week that we're already here. And that's already I think, strenuous commitment for some people. So I just think we're going to have to think about what the solution is here, because we can't just do it all. We can't prioritize the supplemental funds and keep them going and hear them all, and also prioritize the bigger issues without then extending our time, I think.
Alex?
I think just for the sake of getting through our current supplemental requests, and we do have, it looks like later, an opportunity to talk about our priorities as far as base funding and supplemental. Would it be good for us to discuss that at the end of the meeting today so we can get through everyone that's here now and have a more in-depth discussion then?
Yeah, and then just to point on what you were saying, Tanya, that's exactly kind of what I want to talk about in this meeting.
Cool.
In business. But yeah, Alejandro, do you have anything? Casey?
The only piece that I want to also, so outside of that, my next report, did everybody receive the email that I sent about the communication about the funding request that is on the table today?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I just want to make sure we're good.
Was that all the reports? Yep. Awesome. All right, at this time I'll open up the meeting to the first public comment. Is there any public comment?
It's great to hear.
Thanks, Nate. Put on the minutes here. Sweet. Alright, so no public comment. We'll be moving to new business, starting with supplemental funding request presentations 2007 American Geophysical Union Conference for $2,994. Presenters could please come up.
Supported by the School of Graduate Studies, the School of Undergrad Research, the Tech Scholarship Grant, and we are also funded by NSF. So a little bit about AGU. AGU is an interdisciplinary research conference with various fields of science. It is held in San Francisco, California. Again, the date is December 8th through the 13th. AGU is also very active. They publish weekly an EOS newspaper, and they also have 19 peer-reviewed scientific this conference to present our research during various poster sessions with 2 graduate chemistry students, 2 undergraduate chemistry students, and 2 undergraduate geology students.
So Daniel, Jessica, Sarah, and I are part of the Johansson Research Group in the Department of Chemistry. We're an atmospheric environmental chemistry research focus group. And I'm just going to give you a brief overview of some of the topics we covered. So we have a long-term study that tracks the precipitation chemistry of Mount Rainier. As part of that, as sort of a spin-off, my own graduate project looks at nitrate isotopes in Mount Rainier precipitation. We also have a couple people, including Daniel and Sarah, who work on black carbon and other carbon particles and the chemistry behind their environmental and health effects. And then also we have a wine chemical fingerprinting project that Jessica works on.
So I'm Alexis, and another grad student, Erin, and I are currently working under Dr. Susan Inspired, and our research mainly revolves around snow and ice. So for like example, Erin is cutting up and looking at ice core samples from different locations, mainly from Antarctica, and my research mainly involves measuring the spectral reflectance of organic light absorbing aerosols using a hypospectral microscope. So like organics are a collection of complex pictures that are deposited onto snow and ice, which can affect the algae. So my main focus is on that algae that is deposited onto the snow and ice. And then my picture is snow algae, and it's usually referred to water mountains.
So as attendees of AGU, we're going to be getting Central's name out there, and we're also going to be bringing something back. So I just wanted to talk briefly about those points. So as attendees, each of us will be presenting our own scientific poster, but we'll also be able to attend other poster sessions and seminars, and those are going to give us a lot of knowledge base in our various topics of study. We also are going to bring back research ideas and technical knowledge to our departments, chemistry and geology. And of course, we're going to be representing Central Washington University at a major international scientific conference.
So I'm going to go over the budget breakdown and how we came about all the numbers. So from the graduate office, the travel funds, we already established an 800, 400 for me and Rob. Those have already been committed. We applied for the undergraduate funds, the undergraduate students, and they applied for 1,500 there. And then the Keck scholarship grant, that $500 has already been committed as well. And so the breakdown of the budget that we have over here, we have airfare going for about $250 per student. And the reason we did that is we looked at the current prices and we knew we weren't going to be able to purchase the flights closer to the event. So we kind of estimated there would be about $250. And then that's for 6 people going, because we have one other person that's not here today. The hotels, me, Rob, and Aaron, the other person that's not here, will all be sharing the hotel room. And that was about $2,100. And then Sarah and Jessica's room has already been covered through the Keck grant, but is not part of the $500. And we're looking for Alexis to join their room, but we're not sure if that's possible, so we budgeted a little bit extra just in case. And then for transportation, we have to take a taxi or an Uber from the airport to the hotel that we'll be staying at in San Francisco. And we kind of looked at rates, and they were about $50 to go from the airport to the hotel that we're staying at. So we're thinking $50, we'll have to take at least 2 Ubers to accommodate for all the people. And then another 2 to get back to the airport to come back here. So that was about $200. And we found a bus that goes to the conference about $5 per day. And for 5 days, and then there's 6 of us going, so we thought it was about $150. So altogether that was $350. for transportation. And then registration for undergraduates was $140. Again, there's 4 undergraduate students, so that's $560 total. The graduate students registration was $290. There's 2 of us, so that was $580. And then the abstract cost for all of us was $60 just to submit our abstract for review. And then Rob will have to take his car to the airport and he'll leave it there. And we looked at costs for leaving your car at the airport, and it was about $150 for the time frame that we'll be at the conference. And then we're unsure if Jessica or Sarah would also need to go carpool and leave their car as well, or take the shuttle. So we budgeted that in just in case somebody else needs to take their car and park their car there as well. And then we budgeted food, but only for the undergraduate students, because the undergraduate funds, the $1,500, they actually support undergraduates getting reimbursed for food. So we just put that based off of the per diem for the undergraduate students. So that $560 that we budgeted there will only come out of the undergraduate funds. And then we requested the $2,994, and then our SAS funding request was $1,200. And then that's basically it. You guys have any questions?
Is the $1,200 that says for SAS, is that going to be requested of the funding council?
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe our presentation for that is actually tonight as well.
Alex?
And do you know what the status is on so you said the graduate funds are secured?
Yeah, those are like, we already received that funding, and we already just today bought our registration for the company with that money.
Do you know what status is? Is it the same with undergraduate? And
No, so the undergraduate one is actually due, I believe, like today or tomorrow. It's due tomorrow, so they won't find out a little bit closer until the conference if that money isn't for sure.
Eric?
If that money isn't secured from the undergraduate, School of Undergraduate Research, what is the plan at that point then, if that $1,500 is not secured?
Well, so what we ended up doing is these guys are applying as part of the chemistry, and then we have the other 2 undergraduates from the geology. So we know it's kind of competitive. So if one group doesn't get it, we're hoping that the other group will. And our experience is usually, if you have a good enough reason, like going to a conference of this sort, they will supply the funds for that.
Are you guys receiving credit for this research?
Yeah, so you do apply for credits for the actual research that you do on campus, but this is just to further our knowledge in our fields of study and to come back to the school and further the research that's done here to bring new projects back.
So when you come back, you'll continue.
Yeah, so you just continue your projects. And so I'm a grad student, so for me, when I go, I'm going to be looking to further other projects for undergraduate students that are coming in to continue research in the same field that I'm doing.
Eric?
So how will you take this information that you gather here at this conference and bring it back to help other undergraduates, presenting this information, including them as part of the thing is also
Yeah.
helping students going, but also helping students here on campus?
Yeah, so with that, there's a lot of experts in our field, so people that already know current research that's going on in these fields. So if I go to this conference, I can get more feedback on my project, different directions on where to go, other things I can add on, maybe something that I personally haven't thought of with this project. And that'll help us further other projects that'll go on here at Central. Because they also get in contact with our research advisors. We could give them their information, and they can brainstorm together that way as well. And a lot of people do like doing that. They'll give you their card to be pass your information on to your research advisor, and then they brainstorm ideas that way.
Do we know the further benefit to the students of CWU outside of chemistry or geology department?
So the chemistry department secretary is always pretty good about publicizing student accomplishments. So it kind of advertises here's this program, we're doing good things, our students are active, and that reflects on the school at large.
Eric?
Will you be presenting your research at Source?
At Source? Yeah, I think most of the time, most of us end up presenting at Source as well.
Yeah, so I actually presented this last spring, and I think I will be presenting again.
Yeah, I also presented last spring.
Please.
Is it a requirement if you receive undergrad or grad funds that you actually have to present at Source? Or is that not a requirement?
That is a requirement for undergraduate research funds and probably
I'm
for,
not sure for the graduate.
it's unclear about graduate funds.
And then just to ask, is like the chemistry and geology department like supporting us in any way financially?
Oh, yeah, so we got the funds for the graduate, or from the graduate funds. Those are confirmed, but she told us that we couldn't use those funds until we left to the conference. It's like one of those technicalities, she said. So the chemistry department actually paid for our registration today, and they're gonna get reimbursed from those funds for us to go to the conference. Yeah, and they're the ones that encourage us also to apply for these types of funds to go to the conference as well.
Any more questions from the committee? No? Awesome. Thank you. You guys on me next week. Awesome. Good time here. We'll be moving on to funding request 2008, which is the big band tour of Vietnam and Thailand. It's $11,775. You guys have 10 minutes to present. Some followed by 10 minutes of question. Yeah.
Alrighty, well, thank you guys for taking the time to listen to our presentation today. We represent the Vietnam and Thailand Big Band Tour for 2019. My name is Max Groschader. I am an aviation major as well as a music performance major here at Central.
I'm Liam Cameron. I'm a music performance major here at Central.
I'm Joel Steinke. I'm a music performance major here at Central.
Tim Kuski, music performance as well.
I'm Nick Coletto. I'm a music composition major.
I'm Lane Wilkinson. I'm a music education major.
So, for this incredible opportunity, we will be performing at a wide variety of concert venues, including hospitals, orphanages, universities, as well as the U.S. Embassy in Hanoi. All of these concerts are free to the public, and they each offer their own form of cultural enrichment and ambassadorship. We will be playing alongside a group of professional musicians, some with as much as 5 decades of experience, as we tour for 6 days in Thailand and 8 days in Vietnam.
So to kind of summarize, these are 3 concerts. We're volunteers participating in outreach concerts. Thus, we're looking to allocate money for travel and hotels. Thus far, we've requested funds from the SAS, the music department, and the Office of Undergraduate Research for about $16,000, plus 2 total roughly.
Okay, so this is the budget. This is more of a simplified version of what you have in front of you. First of all, there's the flight to Vietnam from SeaTac Airport. That's $7,380. You'll notice that on the form, it's $7,500. We're planning to use some of the money that we get from the Office of Undergraduate Research to cover some of the cushion room as the tickets get more expensive towards actually going on that trip. So we've reduced that number for you there. The flight to Bangkok from Ho Chi Minh, that's just international in between each of the city's major airports, is $930. Hotels are $3,108, which Tim will get into more detail where we're staying later. The other change you'll notice is the shuttle to and from Seattle is $492. As we've had the Vietnamese visas redacted from our original request for services and activities, we've added the shuttle to and from Seattle. So there's about a $230 total difference there, but otherwise, it's pretty much, that's it. All of the other funds to pay for the rest of the trip are coming from the other, SAS, Department, Office of Undergraduate Research.
All right, so all the locations where we will be visiting in our travel itinerary. So once we leave from SeaTac Airport, we'll arrive in Tan Son Nhat in Vietnam, specifically Ho Chi Minh City. Max actually will be leaving a day earlier than the rest of us. For the most part, we're spending 6 days in Vietnam, and we're going to spend the night at the Alagon Central Hotel. Then we take the flight from Ho Chi Minh City to Bangkok, and we're spending a few days in Chonburi, 2 days specifically, at the Thais Hotel, and 4 days in Bangkok, Thailand.
How this will benefit CWU and its students is we'll be learning valuable networking with professional musicians while we are there. A lot of the other members of the band we'll be performing with come from around the globe. They're not just musicians from the United States, and so to be able to get their contact information, to be able to outreach them further as we advance in our careers would be a great resource to have. As well, performing in Thailand and Vietnam, they have slight musical style changes and influences that we want to learn and be able to then share to students when we get back in our ensembles that we perform in. Doing so will just help enrich the quality of our ensembles and bring more diversity and culture into our music to make different genres sound more realistic to how they're actually performed in that country. We will also be allowed to act as cultural and artistic ambassadors on behalf of Central Washington University while over in Thailand and Vietnam. We'll be performing at a lot of orphanages, schools, universities, and getting time to talk with the students and faculty about music, about jazz, about our program at Central, because also we can have international students come to then audition for our ensembles.
All right, and we'd like to conclude our presentation with a question and answer session. So any questions that you guys have?
Eric?
Have any of you done this before?
We have not personally, however, previous Central students have gone on this trip before. Not specifically Vietnam and Thailand, they've been to Israel, and I think Australia, and China.
And so, just kind of going off what I heard before, you guys are just going there to pretty much volunteer?
Yes. Yes. There's no compensation for performances.
Great.
What is the IHS World Orchestra?
That's the orchestra that's hosted by Lawrence Dacher. He's like a Swiss trumpet player. He's really awesome. That's the name of his ensemble. And he
The
invited us.
IHS is what's an acronym for International
Horn
something or other?
Society. Yeah. International Horn Society is in the United States is for French horn. So he called it that, and unfortunately it is the same. So we put World Orchestra at the end, represents our jazz ensemble.
Edgar?
Did you all make any contact with the students that went last year?
Yes.
Yes, we have.
Yeah,
Yeah, we
have.
know them well.
Yeah.
So can you, what did they bring back to you?
Yeah, so we actually kind of had a meeting where they discussed their experiences through us, and it was an open forum panel where music majors could come in and listen to what they experienced on their trip, and you learn about the different style influences they had. It was very helpful, especially in my playing, and helped me as a future educator to bring more cultures into my future teaching as students. That is a big part of the state music standards, is bringing culture and diversity into the students that I teach, and this will help them a lot.
Tanya?
How are you selected?
So with both recommendation from the previous students, I think the gentleman that runs this knows the quality of musicianship here at Central. So we were all personally asked, invited, to be a part of this.
We're really good.
And so you're talking about like you guys go and it's kind of like brings other like international students to the campus.
That would be if they would want to come and see. They're basically seeing some of the performance caliber that we have to offer, and if that interests them, we can talk about that with that student face to face and answer the question.
And on top of that, Central's music program is starting to build a larger connection with Asia. We've had like choirs and orchestras go to Europe many times. We're having a band from Japan come, and we're hoping that Wind Ensemble might visit them some point in the near future. So this is really just also helping to further our connection with Asia. And
Eric.
I've been a part of this committee now. This is my third year, and both previous years, students have gone to this. Are there ever any young women invited to perform at this from this school, or is it always guys?
That's an excellent question.
There's still discrepancy in the music department, the females to males. Like that's something that's being addressed with Women in Jazz Day.
Especially
that.
I would say the community is actively looking to improve the visibility of women involved in the music that we play.
I guess my question really isn't that. My question is if this is volunteer, are there no students here at Central, women students that are interested in this thing to volunteer to go to this?
Well, we are selected and asked, and so depending on who's asked then we get to say yes or no if we want to volunteer to go on this trip. But
several students before us did turn down the opportunity. We don't know exactly who they were, though. They could have been female.
Okay.
So you guys are the only American university going? It's just like you guys playing with the...
Yeah, we're the only people from North America who are going. Everybody else is from, the second alto player is from Israel. Which is going to be really cool.
Yeah, the other people that Nick and I are playing the trombone section, they're from Norway.
Some of these musicians as well are previously members of very culturally significant big bands of America, including the Stan Cannon Big Band, which was very prolific for about 30, 40 years.
So they're not just college students?
No, sir, no. Yeah, these are professionals.
These are professionals. And I think they understand the quality of our ensembles, and since we've been able to deliver in the past,
yeah,
let's do it.
Right on, that's cool.
And then just like upon returning, what's your plan of action? What are you guys going to do with this experience?
With this new information?
We said last year we had a forum that allowed all the music majors to come in and ask questions and allowed us to share, or allowed people who went last year to share their experiences. So we'd like to set up something along the lines of that as well to share, because we're going to different countries this year. We're going to learn more stuff that they didn't learn that last year.
Yeah. To add to that, we're also all performers of an ensemble here on campus. And in our ensembles, it's very open comment. If we have comments that we want to make about the music to the band, we're allowed to see it. It's not just the director that's allowed to make comments. So if we hear something that could be improved from our experiences, we can also share that with.
I will say also it's a pretty unique opportunity for a student to be able to continually perform in a professional setting every day. And so that sort of stuff is, in my experience, been really invaluable. Watching students do things similarly in the past, just the change of maturity as they arrive back. So.
You have the opportunity to learn how a professional setting works, which you don't necessarily experience here at university.
Any more questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you. Vote on next year.
Thank you very much.
Moving on to the next funding request, 2009, which is the UBA conference for $23,559.20. Let's have 10 minutes to present. All thanks, questions.
Hello everyone, my name is Osvaldo Sanchez, pronouns he, him, his, president of the Latinx Center Organization, and I'm also pursuing a degree in cybersecurity.
And my name is Morgan Rodriguez, my pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am currently a chemistry graduate student here.
So today we're here to request funds for the 2020 United States Hispanic Leadership Institute National Conference, which is also referred to as USHLI. And today we'll be requesting $23,599.20.
So who are we trying to take on to this conference? We're trying to take 20 students who were selected from a pool of applicants that were then reviewed by a selected committee who then reviewed the applications and the answers to the questions that were on the applications as well as the GPAs. And from those answers, the review committee selected the 20 students who get to go on this trip. And this year we had 39 applicants, so about twice as much applicants as we had slots. And then we also plan on taking 4 chaperones for the trip.
So what will they be attending? They will be attending the USHLI conference, which is a professional development conference that focuses on Latinx empowerment and issues.
And where this conference will be held will be at the Grand Sheraton Hotel in Chicago, Illinois.
And when will this conference take place? February 20th through the 23rd in the year 2020.
So why should we take 20 students all the way to Chicago, Illinois for a conference? This conference is an extremely impactful experience for the 20 students who do get to go because they get a chance to learn some professional development. So at this conference, students spend the various days attending different workshops and speeches led by notable leaders from notable different institutions around the country and some from even other countries. And so these leaders come from different backgrounds, whether that's the job or personal background. And so students listen to the advice and they learn leadership skills, they learn how to network, they learn how to engage in a professional environment. And more than that, they're also exposed to what it's like to be in a professional environment, and they're exposed to people who are leaders that look like them too. And they're left feeling more empowered too, because the workshops don't just talk about professional development, but they also empower students to achieve more. And so this is especially meaningful because a lot of the students who end up going to this conference have never even been on a plane before. They're first generation or low income students who maybe haven't grown up in this type of environment.
And just as Morgan mentioned, we get to see a lot of amazing professionals and leaders. So they don't only serve as keynote speakers, but also serve as mentors, paving the way for us, the next generation's leaders. So for here we have Dr. Juan Andrade, who is the president and co-founder of USHLI. He's received the medal, the Presidential Citizens Medal, which is the second highest medal any citizen can receive here in the US. We also see the likes of Dolores Huerta, civil rights activist, who in partnership with Cesar Chavez co-founded the National Farm Workers Association, which is now known as the Farmers Workers Union. She has received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, which is the highest honor any citizen can receive here in the United States. We also see the likes of Caroline Winga, who is the Chief Diversity Officer and VP of Diversity and Inclusion for Target.
We have also seen presidential candidate Julian Castro give a talk, as well as the first Latina Attorney Surgeon General for the country, Dr. Antonia Novello, and former CWU Wildcat, John Haroldson, who was the first Latino elected district attorney serving in Oregon. And more than being a CWU Wildcat and the district attorney, he's also the chair for the board of directors for USHLI. And what's even more great about that was he was the leader for the Washington, Oregon delegation there. So he paired us up with schools in Oregon that we all connected with.
So these are just a few examples of the many great leaders we get to see at this conference. In addition to that, the returning students also have the opportunity to serve as mentors for the first year attendees. So they're able to assist them in informing them of the proper dress code or how to navigate throughout the conference, how to maximize and select the attended workshops for them, and also how to network and make connections with the people there, and just overall maximizing their experience at this conference.
And so another great benefit of this conference is the interdisciplinary integration that comes along with the conference. So when everybody leaves for the conference, they leave as 20 strangers from around the school who come from different majors, different schools, and different backgrounds. They don't know each other. And then they sit around the same dinner tables and they all attend the same workshops, and they come around and they discuss the workshops at the dinner table, and they discuss what was more meaningful to them based on the backgrounds and experiences they come from. And so we all share these different perspectives, and we all communicate with each other, and we leave with 19 new friends, and we feel like we all belong there almost, because not only in the professional environment where we've all been empowered, but we also feel like we belong here at college as a Wildcat, because we all feel connected to the 19 other people that we had interviewed with.
And the greatest takeaway from this conference is the impact. So the experience doesn't just end with the conference. We also come back, have a group reflection of what we've learned and how we can apply these skills here on campus and within our communities. So for example, we've had students who were inspired to run for student government and office positions. So in the past, we've had 2 former presidents, student government presidents, and vice presidents who were former USC attendees. For example, Alejandro Alcantar here, who attended the 2019 USC conference. And also, we've had other students who run for office positions within their clubs, organizations, or other services. So there's also a group of students that were very inspired from this conference, and they wanted to bring back officially here on campus, which led to the creation of the Latinx Club, which is now known as the Latinx Center organization. So what they do there is that they strengthen the Latinx community here on campus, and they also focus on creating Latinx leaders.
So from an administrative point of view, in President Gaudino's opening address to the school, he talked about retention rate and how he wants to increase the retention rate in the coming years. So what's great about the conference is, of the 91 students we've taken the past 4 years, meaning that this year we'll have taken more than 100, all 91 have continued to study at Central, and they're either still currently studying or they have gone on to graduate. And more than that, the students who have gone on to graduate didn't just graduate, but they went on to do notable internships or careers such as a career at Boeing, or they have gone on to graduate school like us two and many others.
So now we'll just go over the expense budget of the overall conference. So first we start with the registration. So we're looking at $270 per student, and like we mentioned, we want to intend to take 20 students, which comes to a total of $5,400.
And then for the hotel, we plan on putting 4 students for a room, so we will need 5 hotel rooms for the 4 nights, for a total of $3,900.
We also intend to cover the flights for these students, due to the fact that most of these students come from a low-income background. So we're looking at $320 per student, and a total of $6,400 for 20 students.
And for the meal during travels, as well as all of the meals that aren't covered during the trip, we're asking for $280 per diem per student, for a total of $5,600.
And since this conference is a professional conference, and in addition to that, it takes place in February, which can get very cold in Chicago. Students intend to pack appropriate clothing for both the conference and the weather. So therefore, we want to ensure that there will be baggage fees. So we're looking at $50 per student, and a total of $1,000 for 20 students.
And then for transportation to and from the airport, both there and back, we're asking for $100 per student for a total of $2,000.
So the total cost of this entire conference is $25,859.20. So this includes the registration and flight for 4 trip leaders. And the reason we want to include them is due to the fact that they've had a lot of the planning and hard work and effort within planning this conference, or taking us to the conference. And the rest of their fees will be covered, although those will be serving as mentors before and after during this conference. And the rest of the fees will be covered within their departments.
However, we did receive additional funding from other sources. So the Dean's Office or camp has given us $2,000, and then Career Services has also graciously given us another $300. So that brings the total requested amount down to $23,559.20. And we sincerely hope that you do decide to fund this conference, because on a personal note, I have attended this conference twice, and both times I brought just a little notebook with me and I wrote down all the little quotes and experiences that really hit me, and it really was a life-changing experience. I still, on a day-to-day basis, think about the stuff that I learned at the conference. I left that conference driven to do more, but more than that, I also left with the skills and the knowledge of how I can do more. So I think it's an incredibly impactful experience, and I can't imagine how much more impactful it'll be for students who come from a less privileged background than I do.
And similar to Morgan, this conference again, changed my life and was very impactful. due to the fact that it made me help break out of my comfort zone and take on leadership roles here within my community and also as for the students. So it's also pushed me to further my education and pursue a master's degree in cybersecurity or data analytics here at CWU. And things. But yeah.
I'm sorry, but that's time.
Yeah.
So,
Well, that was the last one.
Oh,
So, thank you for your time. Any questions?
Eric.
On your application here, you put down that you're going to be requesting $2,000 from the club council, which would be the funding council. Are you foregoing that?
Yes, so apparently they no longer take funds requests unless it's like from a specific.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yes, you both said you've been before. How many of the other attendees have also gone before?
I don't think that all attendees have been chosen yet, so I don't know.
But usually it's new year students, and then there's also the second year or third year returning students that can serve as those mentor roles, as we previously mentioned in the slides.
Tanya?
The chaperones, professors.
They're administrators.
Okay. Associated with
Yes. It says that you guys kind of came back and did some own like movements or like leadership movements. Could you talk about some like the programs that you guys like maybe created or inspired by because of this conference?
So yeah, so as we mentioned, one of them was the Latinx Club, which is now has turned to the Latinx organization. So what we do there is that we want to strengthen the Latinx community, but we also want to create Latinx leaders. So this is really our second year, and within that year we were to become from a club to an org. And other examples can be, like we mentioned, people running for officer positions. So a lot of these students ended up running for either, let's say, presidents, vice presidents, ESC, those type of officer positions. Also student government, like we mentioned Alejandro here, and you know, any more.
Yeah, so because the application is an open application and you do get the students coming from all sorts of places on campus, it does have a wide reach, the effect of the conference, because those students then go back and they apply what they've learned from that conference to whatever they are associated with. And many of these students do come from clubs and organizations. I personally come from the Chavez King Leadership Institute for Social Change, and I did come back and apply a lot of the things that I learned to that club. And in fact, this year we're working on something that I learned in a workshop last year, and that has to do with building multicultural coalitions, which is part of the name of the workshop. And so we're working on doing just that because of what I heard at that workshop.
Eric?
I just want to say congratulations on the 100% retention rate of the students that have participated in this conference going on to continue their studies here at Central and graduate.
Thanks.
That's quite commendable.
Yeah, it's a really good conference.
Any more questions from the committee? Seeing none, awesome, thank you. We're going on next week. Alright, moving on to, or do we need a recess? No, sweet, okay. Moving on to old business, supplemental funding request voting on request 2001, which is the ACP CMA Annual Fall National College Media Convention, which are the departments Observer, Pulse, and CNW for $1,200 and $858. Going on to voting, do you have any discussion on it? Or did everyone see the email correspondence? Perfect. So yeah, we're moving on to discussion on the funding request.
So if I'm interpreting the email correctly, the rollover is used in the event that advertisements don't come through for funding, or?
Well, to kind of back up, the Observer is, they help support their program by selling advertising. So the funding that they were listing about that carry forward funding, which is about 40,000, is primarily due to those dollars. So I guess their email is really stating that if they were to spend that, that could impact their operation for next year. And I think that was kind of setting that tone of where there could be a potential request for their base funding due to they use that funding to help operate, and it tends to be for their student wages.
Yes, there are reasons why they're not using their funds for this.
Well, I think the other part that they highlighted in here, which wasn't necessarily, I think, what the group had said, but what they're reading is that finding out that the three different, because these are three different student media groups are coming forward, and the other two, and again, as we looked at this last week, the other two don't necessarily have a balance. And so obviously expressing concern from their point of observer paying for all three within that, and what kind of type of impact that would have on that side.
So the piece that isn't really necessarily laid out in that email is, the way that I interpret it is the conversation that we are, that we've kind of touched base on with the student wages piece across the university, right? But primarily with S&A funding, is that their intent is obviously to use that funding to kind of prolong their funding request for the next year and a half. So if the committee was to vote to say, go ahead and use that funding, it could then have a chain reaction for them to come back and have a base funding adjustment. Now, they didn't state that in there, but I think that their intent was just to make sure that the impact would really have to do with the student wages piece, or basically their operating costs and operating, basically, it could change how they operate for the observer. And then the other piece, which was interesting, was they do keep those very separate, those student media groups. And so it has been advised even from me that when students do go to the same conference, even if they are in different groups, that it is actually structurally easier for them to come as one request. So that is something that they have been advised in the past to do.
The one part I would say is just to be clear that your all's decision is really just whether or not the committee is going to provide funding for this. We don't have the ability to tell them they have to go to this, nor if we don't fund it where those funds need to come from. So just as a reminder, we're looking at whether or not we feel this is something that we see benefit in funding from this pool of money. If you choose not to, there's nothing saying they will go, or if they do, where that funding will come from. Oh yeah, that's true. They would already go. Thank you. So they have already gone.
So what was up with them saying like they have incur like 90,000 in expenses, but they only get base funded 56,000? What's that?
It's less than 40,000 they use.
So basically, in here it looks about, they are projecting to have about $33,000 of ad revenue. And so you can see that they basically, I think they rounded up slightly, and there could be an updated number for their budget piece, but their total operating expense is more than their allocation, I think is the end of the day. And so in order for them to maintain their operation as of right now, they sell ads to make up the difference. So one piece, just to be aware, is that when they did come through with base funding a few years ago, they did request more money than what they're allocated currently. And so that's, I think, kind of their answer to basically being able to operate their newspaper. So the production.
just so we know that everyone that's going on this trip is a part of a required class that they get academic credit for, can we talk about kind of like, what's that area where it's like S&A funds and stuff that they get credit for?
Well, I believe with this request, this is a conference, and I'm not sure if they receive, I wouldn't know if they receive academic credit for the conference per se, but they do, they do have individual classes that are associated with academic class, I'd say academic credit, but I'm not aware of this conference being associated with that. Unless Joey, are you?
No, and again, I don't want to misspeak, but I think they have touched on, we have asked this question before, because this is something they traditionally come and request funding for, is that it's a piece based on them receiving awards or being nominated for awards, and so it's not a part of the academic part. There's not a requirement, nor do they get credit for going to the conference. Greg?
And it's definitely not the whole classes. I mean, it's a very select few from each group and each different one. I know that, I know a couple students have gone and it hasn't been associated or part of requirement of any class.
In the past, and I honestly cannot recall from this one, so I apologize, maybe you all will remember, we've had multiples that kind of go together, is these are often individuals who are either the editors for the individual media pieces or individuals themselves who were the reporters or the individuals who are being nominated for the awards, if there's a set individual versus the production itself within our normally the attendees of these. Great.
I've missed a few meetings.
You're here now.
I have another birthday coming up in a couple but I mean, this came up and they presented and I was here then. We didn't vote the next week, or is that? I mean, I'm just confused. We'll just get clarification on that.
So just as a refresher, because I think you were the only one not here last week, is that correct? If I'm looking, I guess I could look at the minutes. Yeah, you were the only one. So it was really in reviewing part of this discussion, the committee, someone on the committee had asked to look at their current budgets right now, and so in pulling up observers specifically, there was a fund balance that was carried forward this year, and the question from the committee to table this was to ask them, is there a reason you're not using that fund balance for this conference? And that's the response that came in.
Oh, great, thanks.
Thank you for asking, Greg, sorry.
So that carry forward is a combined carry forward within the funding cycle? So it could have been a mixture of both years?
Dane?
I'd like to, can I make a motion? I'd like to motion we approve the full amount of $12,858.
Is there a second? Tanya seconds. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? 1. The motion passes. Awesome. Okay. Going on to committee goals and priorities, base funding supplemental. So this is kind of going to go back to the conversation we were having earlier. We're kind of like, we really need to develop, I guess, like our plan of action on what we want to do, because right now it's hard to have all these supplemental requests and then also conduct business at the same time. Triple G put it, it's like trying to grab the bus while change the wheels. And it's really hard to do both. So something I really wanted to talk about was, this is a heavy lift, and I know a lot of it may not get done this year, but the best way we can kind of do about it is if we think of plan of action, if we want to focus on kind of base funding first or supplemental first, knowing that we will do both, but just kind of figuring out our priority in that standpoint, and then understanding the direction we want to go from there. Eric?
I was just going to say, I think if that's the direction we're going, I think we should concentrate on base funding, since next year in January will be the base funding request for the next quadrennium. And if we get to supplemental, great. If we don't, we can leave that for the committee next year to, develop.
I think for this, two things I want to do is one, give some historical context of where we are, and then also just a refresher on what our actual statutory authority is. So I guess the statutory part I'll start with first, and this is for all of you who have read through all the RCWs, which I'm sure all of you have thoroughly. And the Killian is really our committee from the legal standpoint, even within our guidelines, is really our ability, and what we're given is to propose, because we are a recommending body, program priorities and budget levels. And that proposal goes to administration. We have our piece, but that is really the purpose of this committee, is to, again, both within ours and others, provide those recommendations within it. The historical part of this is that our main purpose is the base funding. Where this has gone and where the committee, you all have abilities to decide. Again, a lot of this will not necessarily be things we can change in the middle of the year, but the committee has gone through a number of shifts on this, specifically, and I can go back as far as the last 15 years, is that the committee, again, when the previous fee was not as large because we had a lot less services, we had a different building, those types of pieces. Within the growth of that, we didn't have a supplemental budget that was allowable, so the committee really was solely base funding is what it would be. The base funding have gone through a number of cycles to where we have gone from base funding has to be requested, their budgets every single year, so you get a one-year budget, and then the next year you go through the exact same cycle, to where it has been moved to a 2-year, a 3-year, and a 4-year budget. And so we're currently in a 4-year based on the committee's decision and feedback from base funding areas. Again, it is, you all can provide recommendation. It would be the committee next year who's doing the base funding who would make the decision on what we do within that. Part of that has been the purpose of allowing for funding areas to have a set funding for a period of time, so they're not constantly coming back within those. However, that cycle has gone 1 year to 2 years to 3 to 4. And just based on the sheer amount of work it does take within those years. Again, I'm going to only point to Martin because he was the only one who was here last time. Those happening every year does take up a significant amount of time within it, because those are the only ability for new funding to come forward as well, is whenever we have those based on our guidelines. We have the ability, again, to change whatever that is within it. The other part is, again, because ours is to recommend the funding for these areas, is that really both, as we said, both the base and the supplemental fall under us. It's really kind of the decision of us on how we want to do that. The current process, which I'm glad we're having the conversation, because it's one of those, I try and push forward all the time, so it's not just Lacey and myself who are reviewing the base funding, is that is part of our annual review that we do, the requirements of having the annual reports every year. So we're looking at where they're at financially, but also the questions asked. The questions are determined by you all on the committee on what you're wanting to be assessing and looking at and asking for each of those areas. And then it's really in what capacity we want to look at and do those. Again, you all have the ability to say we're not going to receive any supplemental requests. The one part I would caution on you with that is we need to then, as good stewards of that, have a plan for that money, so we're not just sitting on money there, as we have a lot of areas dealing with some of things. Because right now the plan is to spend that money down so the current students can benefit from that. So in terms of the historical piece, I can give some information. I will tell you, in the 7 years that I've been advising the committee, we have always been in the 4-year cycle. But I do have some information on the whys of the changes before that. But again, I think the main part as we look at this is keeping in mind what our actual authority and what we have been given as the piece that this committee has to do is really that statutory authority that the state gives us of this is the purpose of this committee and what our ability is, because again, it is simply to recommend. There's a conversation that we also had, myself with Dean Gregg, is it may be beneficial as we're making motions to put in mind that we are recommending funding for the trip or for the program, because again, we're not passing that. It goes up to PBAC, or if it's over $20,000, goes up to Board of Trustees. So we're not actually funding anything. We're recommending body to provide those, so that way again, it's more from the, if you want to look at it from this, the Board of Trustees is responsible, and they have deferred that responsibility down to our committee, so that way students can have a voice on where all this money is going. Greg?
Has anyone about this committee ever denied anything?
I will
In
say,
your 7 years?
I have to think, hold on, that's a lot of years to go back through. I guess I'm raising my hand up. No, there has not been. There's been pushback, and there has been questions sent back. The way the process really works is we provide a recommendation to PBAC. PBAC then has the ability to vote on their recommendation as well. If they don't agree with what we have, it actually goes back to us. So if we put something forward saying we're recommending to fund, and we'll even just use tonight's example, we're recommending to fund the National Media Convention. If PBAC comes back and says they do not recommend that, it kind of goes back to us, and then if we're in agreement with their choosing not to recommend it, it stays there. If we disagree and say no, we still believe this should be, it goes through the whole dispute resolution portion of our funding piece. We've had times where PBAC has brought, and even the Board of Trustees has pushed to ask questions before they're willing to vote, saying we would like some more information on this, or we would like to know why, or they will vote either recommend or to approve. However, they will send a message back saying, we have questions about this, or we're funding this, however, we would like the committee to look at this further or be more mindful of X, Y, and Z. Lacey?
So on that note, I haven't had them, in my experience, deny anything, but they do question, not necessarily student or club approved funding requests, but they have asked detailed questions about funding departments. And what the conversations are at the table, not just I usually type up kind of a blurb of what that funding looks like, but they're not necessarily asking those details. They're asking what the committee is talking about and where they're feeling, and potentially what that vote looks like. So I would just caution, especially with the budget environment, with some of our changes in the last couple of years on campus-wide, is people that sit at the PBAC are deans and faculty and administrators, and so they do have questions about that type of process, specifically when it comes to departments.
Joe? I'll just say the last time that I know there was a disagreement was the year before I took over advising, which was a base funding year, to where there was pushback from the committee in not wanting to fund specific pieces, which went up to administration, and there was some pushback on that, which led to the State Attorney General's office being involved in some of that dispute resolution process. But that was the last time that I'm aware of.
So I'm guessing that probably mostly, any input from them is generally probably on base funding, not supplemental.
Well,
but I guess it
yeah.
depends, right?
Yes.
I mean,
yeah.
it always depends, because just like the S&A committee, PBAC's committee members can change as well.
Yeah.
And I think we just need to be mindful of those types of requests and those thoughtful conversations that are around the table, because they do have the ability to ask those questions. And sometimes it's not as conducive to having, the financial manager stand up and answer some of those. So it's actually almost better for the committee, both committees involved, if we actually come back and actually have a, written statement if they have any specifically detailed questions about the funding request or the status of it. But they do see the ones that have been denied as well. So they see the running total. And that is something, the only thing that I was going to add as well is that there tends to be a little bit more discussion depending on how high the dollar figure is. So if it is one of those figures that will be going up to the Board of Trustees, they tend to have a little bit more conversation about basically the higher dollar figures.
Great.
So I sit on PBAC and I have a vote in my role on campus, and thus one of the drivers why I choose to be here on Wednesday nights, to understand the conversation that you all are having and understand the questions that you have. So when it does come up with PBAC, beyond the minutes, Lacey's support and everything, as a voting member, I can speak to it at a level that understands the wishes of this committee and where this committee responded from during that conversation.
And I will say, I do appreciate the fact that Greg does that, because we have been fortunate in the past that we have had members of the committee who sit on PBAC. That is not the case this year, and so it's really beneficial for us. And Greg did this last year when we did have members as well, to be able to provide that perspective, which I think cuts down on a lot of the sending things back and forth within that. So we have the ability of Lacey being able to answer those as well as Greg or whoever else. And they do ask a lot of good questions and very insightful questions. And those are open meetings if anyone does want to go and attend a PBAC meeting. It would be fascinating to see the next level, just letting you know.
Please. The last piece that I want to add on that is, we haven't seen any of these requests this year, but going back to the department requests, it is something that they do take a little bit more serious, because in normal practice, if departments, academic or student services, if they need additional funding, they actually have a whole other model that they go through. So it's really just being mindful from PBAC's point of view of going, okay, did they request this over here and they didn't get the answer and come this way? Or what was the reason or the rationale of coming through the S&A committee if it's a department based?
Eric?
Well, 2 years ago when we approved the money for the orchestra, and it wasn't what they had expected, and they went and asked, went to the Board of Trustees. They asked the Board of Trustees for the additional funds. The Board of Trustees said, well, you're not going to get it from supplemental, but you can have it from base funding from another year. Is that kind of the situation where that's more of a departmental question? I'm just curious.
I would say that was kind of one situation. I'm trying to remember, I probably could pull up the request just to see. There was a couple last year.
Like with the rec center? Would that have been one of them?
Well, so uniquely the rec center, and we'll even say the student union, are slightly different because they don't have different funding sources. So the academic departments have a completely different funding source than some of these others. And so, and I think that tends to be the look, and I'm looking at Greg as well, is, there's certain areas that are funded by student fees. And that's kind of the way that they need to operate. And then there's other areas that are funded by tuition dollars and other revenue sources. And so I think as a committee, they're looking at going, well, if you have another funding source, what was the rationale of going through a student fee funded source? And I'm trying to think, right now we have quite a few, oh my goodness, I just cannot remember which one that was, where it was that they pushed back on. It was the, I know I guess it was ASL. Do you remember that?
Which request it was?
Yeah.
Was this the?
It was student wages.
Yeah, it was student wages. I remember them coming in.
And it was like $1,200. So it wasn't so much the dollar figure, it was the thought process behind it.
It was ASL.
American Sign Language, and it was student wages.
Yeah.
Remember that. I remember the dollar figure. But it's certain things like that I think they're asking, how did the committee feel? What was was it a easy conversation, or was there a lot of discussion?
Well, and the last thing I'll say on this, and then, because I think to divert us back, the other part to keep in mind when PBAC does that is also when some of those deans are sitting at the table. So the question is sometimes asking across the table to, why is your college not funding and supporting this? So that way the rest of the table is aware of how those academic departments are spending the funding, or why they're not going to these types of things, especially when it's, from the perception wise, something that could fall under or support the academic piece. So that's the other part to keep in mind, who's around that table, is that also kind of facilitates some of that discussion and conversation. With that, to loop back into this other piece, and again, giving the perspective part of it, I think for you all, and kind of going back to Brandon's question, is not necessarily what do we want to focus on, because again, it's going to be both things. It's how do you all want to prioritize the ability to do this, again, knowing that base funding right now is we're going to be getting the annual reports December 1st, which means you all will have the ability to come back winter quarter, but I think how we want to go about reviewing that information, what other information you all may want within that, and what we want to do to set this up. There will be a point, regardless of what we decide of when, we will have to cut off supplemental funding requests if we're going to keep getting the massive influx we've been getting now, which may mean even if we were to continue at our normal pace and our normal working without changing anything, is if we were to continue getting those, it may come winter quarter that we have had to put out the announcement that we will not be receiving any additional funding requests, because we know they'll be scheduled out throughout the rest of the year. Because we know how many meetings we have, we know roughly the amount of time that those will take. So within that, so just to be mindful of that, is regardless of what is decided, we will get to a point sometime. Normally it's in spring quarter, as those who've been on the committee before know, we'll get to a point where we say we can't receive any additional funding requests after the state because we're maxed out within it. Given the way we're structuring things, that may happen earlier if we're getting more requests. But I think for me the question is, how do you all want to look at those base funding pieces this year, and what type of information, whether it be for this year or to be able to ask questions, so that way the committee next year when we are doing the base funding can prep those areas in advance so they can start collecting that data. And then that would kind of facilitate how or what amount of time we have left to hear supplemental funding requests.
I just don't want anybody to forget that there is going to be there will need to be a conversation about base funding adjustments for fiscal '21. So I just also want to throw that in as a priority, even though, I mean, I think when we say base funding, I think we're thinking of like the future potential base funding, but I also, that is going to be a situation that needs to have a conversation, and timing wise, we try to wrap up our budget for fiscal '21 prepping basically before the end of winter quarter. So, and then we don't have those set deadlines right now, but just so you guys, I think I talked about this before, but structurally, once we do some internal review, after that is completed, it needs to be, what's the type of word, presented to the President's Budget Advisory Committee to be recommended to the President, but also the Board of Trustees. I mean, the Cabinet's in there as well. So there's some approval pieces that we need to make sure we're queued up on beforehand. And I believe the talk is to have that at the PBAC level sometime in late February, potentially.
Alex? So I guess going back to whether or not, but figuring out and structuring our time well in order to address all of those things that we want to address. I guess it does come down to like priorities and how structurally with our schedule we want to prioritize that. I don't know if you have anything.
Not necessarily, but we kind of dive into that, kind of what we were talking about earlier with Tanya. A big talk we have to have right now is kind of like structurally how we're going to conduct our meetings so we can properly hit what we were trying to talk about. How are we going to assess base funding? How do we, talk about assessing stewardship of funds? When they come in, they're going to talk about base funding adjustments. How are we going to assess that? We have no criteria on how to do that, but to get there, we need to kind of have a discussion about supplemental requests that we have right now and the structure of S&A so that we can conduct this business. And so that's kind of like the conversation we should have first, and then move into that one. And so I know some key points we do need to touch back on is the 16th. We want to hear this quarter how we're going to do that, and then looking at next quarter, a deadline and possibly a cap for funding requests for like that quarter or for like the remainder of the year altogether. So yeah, we'll move into that conversation. Eric?
I think before we begin anything, we need to sit down and determine what criteria we're looking for, whether it be as a subcommittee or in a separate meeting that's just specifically that. Because until we create that criteria, we're just going to be spinning our wheels. and I don't want to waste anybody's time here discussing things that aren't based on any criteria at the moment. I think that's most important.
Sure. And so, I mean, again, there's two different things here that both would need some sort of motion. One is the ability, if that is the case, of creating a subcommittee who's going to look at and bring forward a recommendation to the larger part. The other part, which I think we do need to decide tonight because of the timing, is do you all want to find a manner in which we hear all of the funding requests that Circuit County has received today before we convene for winter break? Or do we want to continue with having as many of them come forward as we can and whatever remainder goes to winter quarter?
Personally, I would like us to discuss all of the requests that have utilized the deadline of today.
And I guess just from previous conversation, I would like to hear from Dean Heinzelman on, I mean, you've obviously had experience with funding committees like this, and how they deal with balancing, discussing the larger issues and kind of more supplemental pieces. And I guess I would just want to hear what some other options are, as far as being able to balance those.
Well, I think you can create whatever options you want. I think the challenge in doing that, now that you're into the year, becomes more of a equity issue for those groups that are anticipating or expecting funding. Hopefully they're not expecting funding, but maybe anticipating a proposal for funding. And how, if as a group you want to honor that process this year. I mean, I've been with models where you pick a date for each quarter, or each semester, and all proposals for events and activities happening during a window time period that this group would identify have to be in by. And then you pick a presentation date, a review date. I've been involved with groups that does it once a year. And they do it early in the fall, or they do it late in the spring, and it's for the following year. So you queue it up early and it encourages people to plan and put their proposals in early. But in doing that, I think with the model that's been in place here, that's this rolling model, you need to give fair warning to those that want access to those funds. Or not, but if it's the or not, then prepared to how you're going to respond to that shift and why, and give some real critical thought to that, because it means there's going to be historically some 60-some groups, right, that will have to adjust their activity level for the year. And that's okay. I think with the model that we've had with this rolling process, there hasn't been real firm dates and expectations associated with that. It's just, we just roll it until the money runs out, right? And that's an okay model. I've not been associated with campuses or groups that have that model other than here. I'm used to more structure from this is a date in the fall, this is a date in the spring, or this is a date for fall quarter, winter quarter, spring quarter. And maybe you've got $300,000 and you break that up into equal amounts for each quarter. And that's the model, and that's the structure for the flexible funds. And then there's an annual review. I've always been a part of an annual review for the larger funding level with expectations of what data and information you want included in that presentation. Because it is going to change based upon what that allocation is funding. If it's funding staff, you're going to measure that and look at it differently. If it's funding facilities, you're going to look at it differently. If it's funding programs, you're going to look at it differently. And I think those are probably three categories that I would say have three very different measurements to it, if you're going to look at it that way. But I do think, from a stewardship standpoint, this group should at least be doing a minimal annual review of those funds. And it makes sense to me, given our budget cycle. We have a biennial budget cycle, so we're budgeting really as an institution 2 years, 2-year cycles, right? So you need to, I think if you're going to do 1 year or 3 year, it doesn't make sense. It needs to fit the the rest of the institution's budget cycle. So it needs to be 2 years or it needs to be 4 years. And it should align with that. Because some of what's being funded here also receives funds from that university process. And that would create some real challenges, I think, for some areas if it didn't work. So things I guess I would ask the group to think about. I think an annual review is a wise choice, and I think it meets your stewardship kind of statutory authority over the funds. I think if you weren't doing an annual review, that'd be a problem. And know that it gets reviewed at this level, and then even PBAC is purely a review, recommend. Then it goes to the president, which reviews it with cabinet, and then it goes to the trustees. So it's a 4-level review in almost everything that is determined as a recommendation from this group. So it gets the lens a couple other times. I think, in all fairness, setting a date and holding groups accountable to that is a good way to do it. And you can decide if you want to roll the dollars or separate the dollars. I'm accustomed to more structure than what we have.
I guess I just don't want us to get locked into whatever model we have currently without considering other, I don't want us to try to squeeze in however many requests we have into the 3 more meetings we have, because that's the way we think. I mean, that's traditionally how we've had the structure. There are other models that work better for balancing both those things, where we can hear all those requests. Then I think we should at least consider those.
Lacey?
So this is kind of more just on the time frame comments. I love the concepts of reviewing the annual reports and kind of staying in line. But if we did that with our 65 different areas, that can take up a big chunk of time in January. And so if we were to couple that, which I think is totally doable, with base funding adjustments if need be, because that would be a great time to be able to do that, that really takes the committee's time for almost half of winter quarter. So kind of looking at just, supplementals and what does that mean, I just wanted to throw that out there, is we might need to kind of put a calendar together to see what meetings we already know that we already have business for, which is, and Joey and I would have to work with that, but that's probably a majority of the January meetings would be associated with that, and that could even trickle into February. So if that's the case, kind of my suggestion would, maybe we can work on a calendar and look at some of those open dates of saying we will see supplementals starting February 25th or whatever that date might be. But if we could work on that plan for even following into the spring, that might help us just plan and maybe set even the deadlines for the supplementals.
Jess?
Will we be able to hear on their annual reports and whatever their base funding adjustments are, at the same time? That'll be together?
Yes. So we are working on getting those reports finalized, but that is the intent. So the intent is to finalize their the rest of their fiscal 20 budget, which will then impact their fiscal 21, which in theory will then give them the amount that they would potentially need to increase if it is voted to maintain normal operations.
Joe?
I guess I should have given a little more detail. Not that I didn't give a lot, but one of the things for those who haven't been on the committee is we do have, and it's broken out, I'll explain why, all the base funding areas come in for program reviews. Meaning they come, so we submit the annual report, they also come in to do a program review and have a set of questions for you all. This is one of the things the committee in the past, again, prior to me being here, because that's when it moved into 4 years, those were in the in-between years, meaning if it was a 2-year cycle, the year in between, all 65 would come in to do a program review, meaning they come before the committee, do the presentation, you'd look at the annual report and ask the questions like we do. That was part of the move for it being 4 years, was the committee feeling there wasn't sufficient time to be able to meet all those. So the way it's broken out now is, and I'm not saying necessarily we cannot change this, because there are definitely pros and cons to this that I can share if anyone wants. But all of those base funding areas are broken out over the 3 years prior to a base funding. So they come and do a program review. individually, but they're once, and then the next third, and then this year, we have a third of those base funding areas who are scheduled to come winter and spring quarter to do their program reviews on top of the reviewing of the annual reports.
So I think for clarification, that program review is a presentation from those individual areas. So it isn't the same paper documents as the annual reports that we have been referencing.
Those are all things we have, and the reason we do it is so you all can look at the annual report as well. But for things to consider, because these are all pieces that we have the ability to tweak whatever, and what I can do is, whether it be a subcommittee that we have or this committee, I think it would be beneficial for the whatever groups are going to decide this, to be looking at what those questions are we have on the annual reports. That again are going to be sent out to everyone because those are due December 1st, but also what questions we require every group to bring forward for their program reviews. Because those were determined by the committee before on what do we want to look at, what do we want to assess and know. And I think it's a great idea for you all to be looking at that, determine, is this information still relevant? Is this what is beneficial for us in reviewing these areas or not? Because that's where we have that ability to be clear in what information we're requesting from the base funding areas. Triple G.
So with that history, have we clustered groups by types of funding? So if it's bonded facility-based support with the third approach, have you clustered that where this third is all of the budgets that are receiving support for facility, capital support, bonding authority, those types of things? So there's some standardization of that in questions and responses, and you can develop a rhythm in reviewing that, or is it random?
So I'll answer. So it has been somewhat structured. We haven't gone through what we're discussing right now of defining everyone into a specific group. So we have put like groups together into similar years. So we'll have all of the CERC areas will come together, or those within the set units, so they're within it. But that would definitely be a piece that, again, I think would be beneficial if we go through all 65 of those and have them broken out into those categories.
Lacey.
So back to what Jessica had said about base funding adjustments. So one thing that I want to be clear is my advice to this would be to have the departments that are requesting a base funding adjustment to actually come in, almost similar like a supplemental request. They come in, they submit their things to the committee has time to review, and they have a presentation where that then gives the committee time to ask those questions. Not all the base funded areas are most likely going to do that. So it wouldn't be all of them, but I would suggest, if we go through this, is to get those areas that are in that situation, that have been disclosing this for now probably 2 years, that there are some discrepancies within their budgets, to be able to have that right away out of the gate so we know what is happening. There's going to be smaller areas that impact won't be as large, but it would be a presentation from those program department heads.
Eric?
I would like to reiterate that I feel, based on equity, that we need to discuss those 16. We need to have them present and then make recommendations based on those presentations this quarter, because we did set up a deadline of Wednesday for them to make requests, and as I would understand a deadline, that would mean for this quarter. That's just my 2 cents.
Jess?
I just kind of wanted to say that I agree with what he said, because if they wanted to be heard in winter quarter, they really would have just waited and submitted it later. So I don't know, just kind of like holding to our own word, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, and then moving on to like the criteria thing, absolutely. If we're gonna hear these requests, we need to understand how we're gonna evaluate them so we can, I guess, evaluate them in an equitable fashion, so everyone's being held to the same expectations, same rules. With that, we would need to kind of like hash that out. But I want to make sure that we don't run into this situation again in the later quarters. And so I kind of want to talk about how we're going to go about that approach, and then we'll move into kind of like the criteria. Eric?
I like Lacey's suggestion, But creating a date, say of February 1st, where we start hearing supplemental funding requests on that day, and then spending January going through base funding readjustments, annual reports, things like that. I think that's a good idea. And maybe also same for spring quarter, maybe not as far in, you know, maybe 2 weeks in instead of a month. But doing that so we're, you know, a little different than our, I thought you said strolling, not rolling. Yeah.
Alex? So if we are going to set that date, we would probably also want to set the deadline. Do we have I mean, when does the quarter start?
Our first meeting is the
January
7th,
7th.
whatever that Wednesday is.
I think it's the 8th.
Yes. Yeah.
And we're saying the first meeting February the 5th, if that's what we wanted to do.
I think so. Well, so I got a question. Do we want to make that the deadline for requests is February 5th? Or do we want, no, that's what I'm asking. I know your office does amazing things. Or do we want to have the deadline for winter quarter to be, say, the middle of January, and then we start hearing them on the 5th?
Lacey?
I would suggest giving Circuit County and their financial manager at least a couple weeks to review. Like I've seen today, you know, to have, you know, about probably 10 to 12 requests submitted in one day. It takes a lot more time than probably people realize to review that, especially when you're setting up meetings and talking with those students. And sometimes these students, this is the first time they're going through this, so they really do need to kind of sit down and even have conversations about the budget piece. So I would say the middle of January is like, you know, first we'll say 2 weeks, or even, you know, the 3-week period, which I think Brandon kind of suggested at the beginning would be acceptable. We could probably turn some around because some would be submitting it probably the next couple weeks too. And just in case we have, you know, I guess we're next week. But I would just say that mid to later January would be more preferable.
Eric?
So if I made a motion that put our deadline for winter quarter request that would come in on January 22nd, and then 2 weeks later from that, we would hear our first presentations on the 5th of February. And that they would be told, I'm almost done, would be told now that the deadline is the 22nd of January, all organizations, however you put that out there. So they know, so they can spend November, December, and have all this time to put in requests now for that deadline of the 22nd.
Tanya?
This doesn't solve, we could end up in the exact same situation that we're in right now, which is we get a bunch and we don't have enough time for all of them. So how do we solve that?
Well, I think one thing that this will allow us more than this quarter, which is, again, we talked about this last quarter, the challenge of us putting one in place, is one, we gave a 1 week window, meaning it gave a very short period of time for people, so us getting a massive influx on the last day, unfortunately, to me is not a surprise, given that we told people that. And the fact that our deadline left us with 3 meetings. The deadline, if we do put as the 22nd, leaves us with 6 business meetings that we can have supplemental spread throughout. So I think it gives us some ability, again, we will see how many we get, but we would know well in advance within that how many we will have by that point coming in, which gives us some scheduling flexibility to have that. But again, if we suddenly get 60 of them winter quarter, it again is a decision for the committee and how we want to do that.
In the Triple G?
I'm say some strategies that other institutions have been at to expedite the conversation when a group is in here is you set a standard for lodging, you set a standard for meals, you prescribe that up front so they know they're going to get $75 a night for lodging, and that's what it is. So don't ask for 300. Don't come in and say, no, we found a budget hotel and it's $50. Well, that's great if they do that, but you set a standard based upon per diems, and you just and that eliminates that part of the Q&A and the conversation, and that's what they can apply for. That's what they get, and that's what it is.
So they really just need like 5 minutes to explain what it is they're doing.
Right, exactly. You know, you expedite it by uploading and front loading a lot of that information that you talk about is what standards do we want as a committee that we feel like is fair. Because even in the last couple of weeks, you know, I've been doing the math on a couple of groups. Some are spending $200 a night on a hotel, and some are, you get the question of, are you staying in a safe place given the price of what you're asking for the hotel room, right?
Yeah.
And that's another way to find equity. It's a high-cost city or a low-cost city, and that's the dollar amount that you decide you're going to give for lodging. That's all they can request, and that's what they get.
And they could use funding from other areas to finish off the $100.
Right, exactly.
Right.
I mean, it sounds great in a lot of ways. I mean, I think that you've got to, I mean, if you're talking per diem, I mean, per diem could be 200 or more
Yeah, you
dollars
get the set.
for a room in some cities, right? Or, so there are state rates, but there's conference hotels that, you know, the advantage of being in a conference hotel sometimes for these students is a real advantage because of the networking and everything that might happen. And if we establish a low $75 and it's going to be 200 a night, then are we only allowing those with privilege to go, and those that can't afford it are kind of pushed to the side so that they're not eligible anymore for funding through this group? So I think we got to kind of weigh that. I don't know how we address that, but I think we need to.
Alex?
And since we brought up the Killian last week, I think that if we want to have a broader discussion about our standards for supplementals, then we can do that. Something that I know I've been thinking about as far as interpreting the Killian is how travel fits into that in general, especially when we're talking about the impact on the student body as a whole. And so we can have kind of a per diem discussion, but I think there's also a broader discussion to be had there about travel in general, and what we think about that in the context of the statutes that we have and the recommendations that we have on the state level. So I'm not sure how, like, if that's a discussion we want to have now, or
I just have a question for maybe Joey and or the committee. So I know it says that we have a presentation for, the presenters present for 10 minutes. Is that a requirement?
It is something that we have written into, but we have the ability to change our procedures, but it is a procedure that we have, that the committee previously has established.
And the reason why I ask that is because there are other funding areas on campus that actually have a submission, and that is reviewed by a committee, but if there's actually not a structured presentation, like 10 minutes of presentation and 10 minutes of questions. So I know there's a lot to be done, and we have a lot of work to do, but maybe that is something that the committee could also revisit.
Eric?
I would like to make a motion that the deadline for requests for winter quarter be January 22nd, 2019, and that the first meeting where we will review for recommendation of supplemental funding requests be start on February 5th of 2020. Sorry.
Is a motion?
Like, this is very minor, but I want to put my 2 cents in. So we had it as a Friday first quarter. Should we keep that? Keep it maybe the 25th? The Friday is that important?
We moved it to Wednesday.
We moved to Wednesday. All right, never mind.
I just want to clarify with you, that's maybe 30 girls or anything, and that's enough time? Yep.
I second the motion.
Alright, Alex seconds. Any discussion on the motion?
So is this kind of try to get on the idea that we do come up with more guidelines and structure for how we do this to kind of mitigate the time crunch?
Eric?
So my next one, after we vote on this one, is that we create a subcommittee of the S&A committee and come up with guidelines so when we start in January, we can have meetings discussing how we're going to apply the guidelines, how we're going to work with base funding adjustment requests and the annual reports, which will consist throughout our January meetings.
But that's not a motion.
Yeah.
So the motion on the table.
Is there official names?
Unless there's any additional comments.
Call the previous question.
Yes, question, sweet. To voting, all those in favor of the motion of setting a deadline for the winter quarter as January 22nd, 2020 for supplemental requests? All those in favor? All opposed? Abstentions? So moved. Deadline set for the winter quarter of supplementals will be January 22nd, 2020.
And so before you make another motion, I will just say, we'll send out notice similar to what we did. And so again, we'll have it on the website. Certainly Canning will have that posted, and we'll ask Alejandro to send it out again to people to let them know. And if we would like, as part of that, we can make it clear that that is maybe not necessarily that they're going to be heard winter quarter, but that is the deadline for them to even be looked at, and then they'll be scheduled when they can fit on the calendar. So that'll alleviate.
Accordingly to this office.
If we get 60 requests suddenly that get turned in and we can't fit it, that does mean they go into spring, and we will make a decision as a committee when we get to a point of when we need to cut off that we will not be receiving, and we'll send similar notice out at that time.
Okay, I would like to make a motion to create a subcommittee of the S&A committee to come up with guidelines for evaluation of supplemental and base funding requests.
There's a motion. I agree. Second. Awesome. Discussion on the motion of forming a subcommittee. Greg?
And do we reevaluate this? I mean, should the committee look at this? I mean, if this is, can we make it go faster if we have, if you think about the questions we're asking, or, you know, the length we want them to describe what they're doing or something else? Maybe that would expedite things, I don't know. If it would or not, it creates more reading on our end, maybe before the meeting or during, I don't know, you know. But, just a thought.
Yeah, and I think that would definitely fall part of the discussion of creating the new criteria and how we want to effectively assess these requests. Which,
Sorry.
yeah, go for it.
There is a difference between the online form and exactly what it's asking and how it's asking compared to the in-person form, right?
It's all the same questions, structure that looks different.
Okay,
Yeah.
but they're actually structured like the who, what, the one that's online?
Yeah, so it's structured that way. I mean, I think some of the, yeah, as far as I know, it is. The only thing that's not in there is the budget is actually supposed to be added. So as you can see in like this one, it has a whole section that they can fill in. But the online is actually suited for individuals to upload their budget as a separate document.
Great.
I would like to amend my motion to that the committee is I forget the right word I want to use, charged. It's charged with coming up with its recommendations by December, so what time is it now? It's the 5th or 6th of November. So by December 15th, the committee can come up with recommendations to present, to send to you all, so you have a winter break to look at them, so when we come back, we can discuss at the first meeting. So I'm amending my motion.
Something to read with our Christmas tree.
Yes. So there needs to be a second.
Yeah, there has to be a second point in there, that's fine.
Just seconds it.
We're voting to amend it.
Yes. So voting on the amendment, all those in favor?
Point of order. There needs to be discussion on the amendment.
Discussions on the amendment?
Good amendment.
Eric?
I'd like to call the previous question.
All those in favor of the amendment to the motion? Opposed? Abstentions? So moved. The motion is amended. Eric?
I'd like to call the previous question.
So now we're voting on the creation of the actual subcommittee. with the due date of having recommendations by December 15th.
All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? So moved. We'll be creating a subcommittee that will be in charge of forming kind of the criteria for supplemental requests. Recommended. Yes.
Yes.
I would say on there, just for the sake of this, if there is anyone who is interested in serving on the subcommittee, please let me know. And I will make sure to get that information coordinated and see if Alejandro, as the vice chair, is going to want to, or Edgar as the vice chair. I was looking at Alejandro as I said it. Edgar as the vice chair should be chairing that, unless for some reason Edgar's not able to serve on it. So I'll make sure we get that set up with the individuals, and so that can start scheduling and working. But we don't have to have that discussion right now. We can tell them later.
So with that being said that we've all just done, do we need to have a motion to then spend the rest of the time discussing or having presentations and then making recommendations for the 16 requests that are in there?
Yeah, we don't have to have a motion because it's our business. What we will need to do, and this is something we'll need to send out and have determined by next week, is in order to do that, because again, it is written in our guidelines, the amount of time that they have, is we will need to add an additional meeting this quarter, which means Aubrey will have to send out something to you on potential available times, and we will need to make sure that we have quorum for that meeting, because it would be a little bit pointless for us to add an extra meeting to hear these requests and vote on them if we don't have enough people. So that'll be the next order of business, is for, if you all have decided that, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a motion, it's more just if that is the majority who are in favor of that, we'll get that scheduled. So I don't know the motion. I know there's been multiple pieces, but I see.
Just to be clear, those are the requests that have been submitted, not approved. So I will review them and hopefully get all my answers or my questions answered, and be able to report back with actually how many we really truly have.
Okay. So this isn't a motion, but can you send out a doodle?
Okay.
And just so we're prepared if we have to, and, yeah.
Well, I guess I would ask just for a show of hands for all those who are wanting, because I know we've had discussion, but not everyone has spoken. By show of hands, who wants to have us schedule all of the submitted ones this quarter? Yeah, great, everyone. Just want to make sure before we're going solely off of the few who are talking.
Dave, do you have something?
Can you rephrase the question?
The question is, are you in favor of us scheduling all of the submitted this quarter?
This quarter, okay.
Yeah. And that's what I assumed, but again, I didn't want to assume because not everyone has spoken. So
You're saying in doing that by having that extra meeting?
we will most likely, and that's where, again, Lacey will go through and review them. If all 16 of them are allowable moving forward, we will need an additional meeting. If for whatever reason we luck out, and then we only have the exact amount that we can fit within our current, then we won't necessarily need it.
So again, I guess just a question. Subcommittee thing.
Yep.
It's up to just we have volunteer.
Yep. Anyone who's interested in serving on the subcommittee, you can let me know either at the end of today, but I would like to be able to get Edgar information really to get this moving by Friday of this week. So if you can let me know, and we'll have that officially created on who's on that subcommittee, and then get that scheduled to start having those meetings.
Is that for defining the criteria for like the supplemental request forms, or is that like what we talked about before with evaluating our spending groups? Like defining that criteria we want to look at, just to be clear on which one we're going
I
after.
believe, and now I'm looking at Eric because he made the motion and I don't recall the exact wording. I believe the subcommittee is bringing forward a recommendation potentially for both.
Okay.
My recommendation is, or motion is that we come up with the criteria at this committee for evaluation to use both on base funding and supplemental.
That's what I said. unless there's any other discussion on this. I think we kind of covered it last time, yeah.
Is there any further discussion on on either point, sub points B or C in old business, community goals and priorities, or the base funding evaluation / assessment criteria? From that, we'll move on to other business, communications received. Moving on to public comment, second call. Is there any public comment? Jenna?
Just want to mention tomorrow's Student Success Day, so we're going to have a lot of folks downstairs, student services downstairs, their departments. We do it once a quarter. It's done from 11:30 to 1:30. So come if you can. And no, we're just here to help and bring services in one location to everybody. It makes it easier for students right now.
Any more public comment? Seeing none. Eric?
Oh, I wanted to make a motion to adjourn.
Oh, alright. There's a motion to adjourn the meeting. Alex seconds. Any discussion? No? All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? So moved. Thank you. This meeting to our 7:32.